I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is one of the best small luxury EVs that you can buy. This is the BMW iX1 X-Line. The one I've brought along today for this review is the dual motor all-wheel drive, the xDrive30. It's reasonably powerful, but what I like about this BMW is that it's not an M Sport. It's actually focused on comfort instead. Now, I'm filming this in March 2024. Eagle-eyed BMW fans will recognize this grille is actually the model year 2023 grille for the iX1. The model year 2024 cars are arriving in dribs and drabs. They get a closed-in grille, they also get an updated infotainment system, but in this video, I'm going to tell you about that stuff, but I'm also going to focus on the core fundamentals of the iX1. What's it like to ride in, what's it like to drive, and is it a good deal? All that and more in today's video. Before we get started, hit subscribe. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by I mentioned in the intro that this BMW iX1 is an X-Line, so you'll see that it's got silver highlights outside, it's got kind of rugged looking wheels, slightly rugged looking styling. Of course, that's kind of just a pretension of ruggedness. Not many people are going to take a vehicle like this off-road. The alternative for the same cost is the M Sport, and I appreciate that most people will want the M Sport, but I actually prefer the slightly more elegant, classic styling of the X-Line. Now, jumping into the interior of the iX1, what we find is certainly an entry-level BMW cabin, but it is still made very well. And the build quality of this particular test car has been excellent. Where you notice that it's not a 3 Series or an X3 in terms of perceived quality, it's just things like this center area here where there's a lot of hard plastic going on. It's still screwed together well, but just certainly not plush in terms of material. And we're also missing the rotary iDrive controller in the iX1, so everything is driven through the touchscreen. Speaking of the touchscreen, the other point that I mentioned in the intro is that for 2024, the iX1 will be upgraded to BMW's iDrive 9, which is based on a version of Android, so it will have its own app store with a wider universe of apps to download. This test car still has iDrive 8.5, and I think for 95% of customers, it probably won't really matter because it still has wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto, and it all works really well. Even though we're missing iDrive or the rotary dial, which is a shame, this is still one of the easier software packages to use in the industry. And in my week in the car, I've just left wireless CarPlay on. The Harman Kardon stereo sounds reasonably good. Maps all work absolutely fine. I haven't found an issue. Plus, you have a phone app which lets you lock and unlock the car with NFC proximity, check on your range, start the climate control preconditioning, all that sort of thing. That works well. Sitting on what BMW calls Veganza seats, which is fake leather. I find that name funny for some reason. You know, whether it's vinyl or polyurethane, I'm not really sure, but it's a decent simulation and it's perforated. They do lack cooling, but little perforations do a decent job of wicking away sweat on a hot day. I wouldn't go for the black though, I'd go for one of the other interior options. You got Oyster, Mocha, it's actually quite a lot of customization. This car's fairly basic. The steering wheel is starting to get a bit of wear relatively early. This car's only got 2,000 Ks on the clock, but it's already a bit of shine. I think this is probably fake leather too. Not sure that's aging as well as the seats. In terms of practicality, it is good. Big cup holders, loads of storage beneath this floating center area here, big door bins. The wireless phone charging actually works in this car. It doesn't always. And even though we do have some of those scratchier materials, others, including the dash and the doors, all look and feel reasonably high quality in this car. Here in the back seat of the iX1, you find one of this vehicle's best parts, which is that even though the X1 isn't actually that big outside, I can fit it in my little garage easily. It's packaged reasonably well here in the second row. I've got the driver's seat in my position. It's quite a big, thick, bulky driver's seat, which takes up room. But where I have it, in order to be comfortable, I've got plenty of room sitting behind myself. So I'm 6 foot, 183 centimeters. Legroom's good. Headroom's good, even with this vast panoramic sunroof in the car. Tow room is fine, even with my driver's seat on the lowest setting. Now, getting someone in the middle is going to be a bit of a task. This is BMW's smallest SUV. They can sell you many, many vehicles that are larger than this, but if you had to do it, you could. The floor is kind of almost flat, but you have air vents, you've got USB-C ports, you've got a flip-down armrest, you've got kind of hard/soft doors. I don't really know what's going on there, but as back seats go, this one isn't too bad. Moving around the back of the iX1 now, the styling of this vehicle being essentially not EV styling continues here. The only way you'll be able to tell this vehicle apart from a regular X1 is no tailpipes. It says iX1 of course, and the BMW Rondell actually has a blue surround for this brand's EVs. You'll also notice this is not a massive vehicle. Even though it is almost the size of the original BMW X3 from way back when, it is not a tall vehicle. So if you've got a smaller parking space, a smaller garage, I reckon this has a good chance of fitting. Open up that powered tailgate. That gets out of the way silently and promptly and reveals an okay sized boot. The Tesla Model Y is definitely packaged better than the iX1 in terms of boot space, and also the Tesla has a frunk. This car doesn't have one of those, but you will get a couple of big suitcases in here. You've got a net off to the left, you've got your first aid kit here on the right, nice sturdy boot floor, and beneath that you've got extra storage space for your charging cables. BMW throws in your household power cable and also a Type 2 to Type 2. Fairly generous. Those cables run at about 400, 500 bucks each, so that is actually worth something. Plus you got your controls here to either close that power tailgate or to close it and lock the vehicle, although the iX1 has what I would call true proximity, so as soon as you walk away with the key, the vehicle just locks itself anyway. Next up, I'll give you realistic efficiency and range numbers. As with all our EV reviews, we tested the iX1 with our real-world urban and highway range tests. We also did our independent highway recharging test. The WLTP range claim for the iX1 xDrive30 is 417 kilometers. The reality is only slightly worse. In our urban driving test, the iX1 used 17 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers for a realistic urban range of 381 kilometers. It was actually a bit more efficient on the highway at 110 kilometers per hour, where the iX1 used 16.2 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks for a realistic highway range of 399 kilometers. Then we performed our Chasing Cars highway recharging test, charging from 50 to 350 kilometers of highway range to simulate your typical stop on a road trip. On this test, the iX1 took 39 minutes and 59 seconds. It can hit peak charging speeds of 130 kilowatts, but it averaged just 75 kilowatts during our 50 to 350 kilometer charging test. When it comes to servicing, BMW uses condition-based intervals. A discounted service plan can be purchased with the car, and this costs $2,200 for 6 years and unlimited kilometers of coverage. Warranty for the iX1 is 5 years and unlimited kilometers for the vehicle, but 8 years and 160,000 kilometers on the battery. All right, time to take the BMW iX1 xDrive30 X-Line, quite a mouthful, out for a drive. Bit of an outfit change. That's because I've been driving this car all week, virtually non-stop. All my commuting, a little bit of road tripping, done the best part of 1,000 Ks in this vehicle. So I feel like I actually know it quite well. I feel like I know most of the cars I review quite well, but especially this one over the last few weeks. And that's because I've actually really enjoyed driving it. I found myself taking it for errands, taking it home after work, because it's actually just a really pleasant vehicle to drive. Definitely not perfect, and I'm going to explain the things this car needs to improve on in the future. The platform that underpins this vehicle is not that far divorced from the old X1. We are still on the UKL architecture here, shared with the Minis. It's the UKL2 platform for the new iX1, but it's certainly not all new, but the powertrain stuff is very novel. There used to be no electric X1. Now there's two varieties, a front-wheel drive and then this car, which is all-wheel drive, but the dominant motor is at the front. In terms of performance, the numbers look pretty good. 230 kilowatts of power is nothing to sneeze at in any small to mid-size SUV. 494 Newton meters of torque is what we used to associate with 6-cylinder engines with a turbo on top, so we don't have any shortage of pulling power here in the iX1. And certainly compared to the petrol versions, the iX1 looks pretty generous in terms of performance, and it backs up on those claims, at least when it comes to the acceleration, which is really strong here in the dual motor xDrive30. But the battery, 64.7 kilowatt hours usable, and everything required to make this vehicle proceed down the road as it should, despite being fully electric, does make the iX1 very heavy, just under 2,100 kilos, which is very heavy and very dense for a vehicle that's not that big. Even though the X1 has certainly grown in size over the years, it's still only 4,500 millimeters, so it's by no extent a large SUV. An X3 is a size up, an X5, an X7 above that. The X1 is not a massive vehicle, so it's kind of a funny effect that it is so heavy, and you definitely can feel that weight in almost everything that you do in this car. But because this is a kind of rugged looking, comfort focused, premium small SUV, I don't think that really matters, because to me, the iX1 X-Line doesn't really have a pretension of sporty driving to it. I think it's actually a BMW in the old school kind of luxury line or SE way of doing things. You always used to be able to get a sporty version and kind of a luxury version, and that's what we've got here in the iX1. Now, the way this vehicle drives is very, very neutral. There's really nothing to be gotten out of driving the iX1 hard. It can be hustled on a country road, and I certainly tried it out in preparation for this review and while getting my vehicle assessment done, but this is not a BMW that encourages you by way of good vibes to push it harder and harder on back roads. It can certainly do it, it can stand up to the punishment, the suspension's good enough, the steering's good enough, but you just don't really feel anything inside as you push on. Instead, the iX1 is a good car in the way that satisfying cars are good cars. So not every car has to be massively sporty, not every car has to have like super fulsome steering. Sometimes cars are allowed to just be good, comfortable, quiet, nicely damped, and the iX1 is all of those things. So to comfort, at first I actually thought the iX1 was almost superficially comfortable because it is very soft and the body control is not perfect, and I definitely think this is something that BMW should work on for the LCI facelift version of the iX1. The body control should be cinched in a little bit, because when you go over a speed bump or urban imperfection or a big bump on a country road, the rear end in particular just doesn't feel quite tied down enough to give you enough confidence as a driver. But bring the pace back a bit, drive it gracefully, and just enjoy the fact that it is super plush and it all seems to make sense. But I've certainly criticized other EVs like the MG4 X-Power for being not controlled enough, and I'll criticize the iX1 for the same reasons. The difference, of course, is the iX1 isn't putting itself out there as a sports model. I think it's quite happy to just be comfortable, and I think most people will enjoy the plush ride that this vehicle delivers. Just need to cinch in that body control a little bit, BMW. There's also the fact that it's very sort of front motor dominant. There's no oversteer to be found in this car on the throttle. Now that the X1's getting bigger, almost like a normal BMW, I kind of wish that they'd put it on the cluster architecture platform where it would have had its dominant motor on the rear, or you would have been able to get a single motor rear wheel drive version, because that probably just would give the driver a little something extra. But again, referring this car back to its purpose, it's just a comfy family cruiser. Everything is totally fine having that bigger motor at the front, and the motor is one of this car's major strengths. BMW has done a fantastic job developing its latest generation motors that you'll find throughout most of its EV lineup. These motors are smooth, linear, quiet, no whine to be heard throughout the system at all. If the only noise that you'd be hearing, such as this, is the Hans Zimmer iconic sounds electric soundtrack, which you can turn on or off. Personally, I don't mind it. I've just left it on in like a quiet setting in my week with the car. The motors are super silken and refined. The only thing you could really compare them to is like driving a V8. Now, this car doesn't have a huge amount of top end. Above 100 kilometers per hour, the acceleration definitely tapers off. But around town, it is as silken and velvety as a V8, and that is just lovely. So too, in terms of good tuning, is the B mode in the transmission, the high regeneration mode. It's not quite one pedal driving, but it is very, very close, and it's so well tuned that I just leave the car in B mode when I'm around town, and I enjoy the fact that I can virtually drive it on one pedal. I just have to tap the brake to bring it to a stop, which is a little frustrating because, like so many BMWs, it's actually hard to stop the iX1 smoothly. Weird quirk, but just the way BMW brakes and the brake pedals seem to engage at the end of when you're slowing down, it's a little hard to slow down smoothly. But again, if this is your only car, you're going to master all that stuff just by exposure. Visibility out's good, it's pretty quiet, the Harman Kardon isn't bad, the technology works pretty well. The range, that's a sticking point for me. High 300s is cutting it real fine for a vehicle that is going to appeal to family buyers. For me, for my money, and for 2.1 tons almost, this car should be able to do closer to 500 Ks than 400, and this thing's only in the high 300s. For me, that's a little bit of a disappointment when it comes to the iX1. A shout out to the safety features though, because this vehicle has a really good suite, and yet they somehow avoid making a nuisance of themselves and getting in the way. BMW actually removes the speed nannying from some of its Australian spec cars so that it will flash the speed limit. But again, not all these speed limit cameras actually read the speed sign. So instead of binging and bonging
like a Genesis, this car is nice and quiet. You can see the speed limit, you can make your own decision. In terms of the adaptive cruise, the lane keeping, it's just really finely calibrated, really well done stuff. I think BMW is a bit of a sleeper when it comes to safety tech, because a lot of the time the tuning is almost the best in the business, and that's how it goes for the iX1. So I'd like a little bit more range, a little bit more weight, would prefer the motor to be at the back, but all things considered, this is a nicely honed, nicely tuned car, which would be easy to just drive every day. I like it.
So those are my opinions on the BMW iX1. This is a small SUV which is quite easy to like. It's not without shortcomings. The range could definitely be better, and I think the relationship between the body control and the damping needs to be tightened up a little bit more. But as it is, this is a soft, plush, comfortable, well-made and exceptionally smooth small electric SUV to drive. The fact that you can pick them up for under the luxury car tax, therefore qualifying for massive incentives on a novated lease, mean that this vehicle does stack up to be good value if you are a leasing customer. So that's something to keep in mind. Those are my opinions. Very keen to know yours. So let me know down below this video in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell if you've enjoyed this video. As always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.